Welcome to another episode of The Deep Dive, where we take a deeper look at the topic, the message, the passage from the weekend message. Just take a deeper look at it, make some jokes, have a little fun doing so, and open up God's Word. My name is Brad. I serve, a variety of roles here at Calvary, but I get to do some online stuff and podcasting, which is a whole lot of fun. Today, joined by Pastor Ben Powers, Pastor P.
Pastor P. Adult Ministries Pastor.
Yeah, Adult Ministries Pastor, Mid-Rivers Campus. Ben, how you doing? We're talking about dating today.
Yes, we're doing well. This is an interesting topic for me since I am not in the dating scene.
Yeah, no, me neither. Well, date your wife.
I guess so, yes.
Hashtag. So we're talking about dating. We're continuing in our relationships series where what we've done is we are using the narrative of Jacob found in Genesis, looking at the relationships that Jacob had, the impact those relationships had on his story and how God worked redemptively through all of those relationships, and drawing parallels to the relationships that we have. Like, okay, hey, what can we learn from Jacob's story and apply in our own?
Yes.
And so obviously relationships in 21st century America, a little different than the relationships from, well, depending on how you...
Genesis, whenever that was.
Depending on your view of how old the earth is. Let's just say multiple hundred of years BC.
Let's be safe.
To be safe. A long time ago. People are people, but the nature, the social dynamics, the power dynamics, the relational dynamics are a little bit different. And so what can we learn from Jacob's story? What can we apply to our own? And so obviously the topic this weekend, and, you know, Ben, we had you, expert dater, to teach us about dating. Dating was not really a social construct.
No.
In their age,
No.
in their time, you went around about it a little bit differently.
Yes,
we're gonna get into that, but just to kind of maybe start off with something fun.
Yeah,
if you could describe Ben Powers as a dater in 2 words, what would you say?
Awkward and confused.
Dazed and confused.
Dazed
awkward
and confused.
And confused.
Yes. Yeah.
So for me, selfish and uninterested.
Huh. Interesting.
Well, until it was the right person.
Okay.
And then I was still selfish, but not uninterested. If that makes sense. So I guess to set the stage, dating now, a little different than dating then.
It is.
Even dating now, different than dating when you were dating.
Yes, yeah.
Different than when I was dating. Mal and I, we got married in 2014. So we dated for, a couple of years, engaged before that. Even the world that, when I've worked with students, and I mean, you have teenage kids, it's a different world.
It is a different world. And even the statistics, I mean, when you look at it, and we all know that people are, this generation is dating or getting into relationships or marrying later on in life, later. And but the thing is,
in the church too.
But the thing that's interesting, and the statistics that I saw, is that people who are single, majority of Americans want to be married. Not everybody. And
that's a goal. That's still a value, a thing that people want to strive towards.
Right. It just is happening later on in life, and there's just more. There's more difficulties for people to work through in order to get to that place of marriage. And it is different than when we were younger.
Yeah.
So
why do you think that is?
Some of the statistics that I saw was, the divorce rate is so high, and so people see their friends or their family go through divorce, and they don't want that to happen to them. Some of it's career. They have career goals, professional goals, financial goals, so marriage gets in the way. Technology. I mean, less people are together, and so that means less social interactions, less dating, less marriage. And then the other statistics are on the increase in pornography and just it's a skewed view of what marriage is, or a cynical view of what romance is. So kind of all of those factor into, people are just slower at it. But the thing is that most people who do want to be married, do they actually eventually become married? It just is taking longer.
Yeah, I think bringing up the pornography stat, I think is an interesting one. In the church world, one of the reasons that you see people get married so young is because if sexuality within God's design for humanity is connected to marriage, well, I want to have sex.
Yeah.
If I got to be married, let's get married.
Let's get married.
Right?
Yeah.
And I do think that we live in a space and time where, culturally speaking, I think some of it's like a pendulum swing, right? We've evangelical churches, evangelical culture had one way of thinking about sex. I think about the purity movement. And we've, in a way, made a big pendulum swing past that, where our culture is hypersexualized. I don't know. I was reading one stat a few days ago where people are also having less sex in like dating relationships too. So I don't know if that's a pornography thing. I don't know if that's a uninterested thing. I don't know if that's people just aren't in relationships. So if they're not in relationships, they're not having sex. Like, there's so much there that we could probably unpack, but I do wonder if part of the delay in even getting married is if we've separated sex and marriage. Why?
Yeah. No, I think so. I mean, I've heard the term sexless marriage, and that's an actual thing. And yeah, it is. It's all of those dynamics of having it separated. And I think when I think about it, I think it's the foundation for Christians is to build a relationship, build a friendship first. And then that leads into everything else that we can enjoy about marriage. But if you don't have a friendship first, that changes everything.
Yeah, that's good. So, I do think categories are helpful for this conversation. One of my favorite exercises to do when I was a youth pastor, and the students, I think, were aware of my growing separation in terms of like my hipness factor, in terms of like being trendy or being let's just say there was a growing distance between me culturally and the students.
I think you're pretty hip and trendy.
Well, Ben, there's a distance between you and me, too.
Well, I'm 47 and I'm not 18, so.
I appreciate that. No, and so one of the things that I would like to do with students was, okay, here's a big whiteboard. Let's throw all the terms that we possibly can to describe what I would describe as a dating relationship and what you would describe as a dating relationship. And so we were trying to put in order when certain moments happen, right? Like, because like whenever I was dating, we had terms like, oh, we're talking, we're dating. That was kind of it. Like hanging out might have been one too, but like those were the things. Yeah. And so students would throw things like, oh, yeah, they're a thing. Well, that's the least descriptive thing ever. What do you mean, they're a thing? And, so at this point, are they dating? Oh, no, they're not dating yet. So what are they? They're a thing. Oh, they're talking. Is talking before being a thing? No, being a thing is talking. Okay.
Yeah.
Language is helpful. Clear is kind. To get us back into the story of Jacob, though, they didn't have all those categories that we're aware of. It was... You're single and you're part of your dad's house. Or you're married and you're your own.
Right.
And so anyway, set the stage for us a little bit.
No, there's nothing in between that. But what's interesting about this story and what's interesting about Jacob is he does get that kind of that little breather. He does get that chance, and it's because he has to leave his house. He stole the blessing. Isaac has just come to terms with it. Esau, his brother, wants to kill him. Both his parents know you got to go, so they tell him you cannot stay here. You have to go. So he's out by himself for the first time. For the first time in his life, he's single.
Could you imagine if we had either social media or like back then? Like we have, we have the Keeping Up with the Kardashians.
Yeah.
Like this would be an incredible reality television show.
It really would be. It's interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's on a journey. I mean, he's walking in the wilderness. It's a 500-mile journey to Padan Aram, and that's where his dad sends him.
Walk 500.
I didn't put that together till now. That's great. But it's they send him to Rebecca's family and say, marry from within, marry in God's covenant, and go there and find a wife. And so usually the parents are heavily involved in that process, but they can't, and he's got to go. And so you get this kind of, here's a single man out of the house for the first time. And God gives him a dream, and he comes across this pasture. He finally gets to where he's supposed to be, and he sees, he sees these shepherds, and they have a well, and he sees Rachel for the first time. There's like this
movie moment. You think there's probably some music swelling in the background.
Oh yeah,
the lights, the clear, cloudy vision.
Yeah.
She just emerges.
It is totally that, and. I love it because what I found was in verse 1 it says, and Jacob continued on his journey, and the word for journey is an interesting Hebrew word. It's only used one time in the Bible. It's used here, and they could have used journey, travel, all kinds of stuff, but they write and they say it means to be swept away, to be carried off, to be to lift yourself up. And it's this...
Don't say there's not romance in the Bible.
I know. And so there's this, like, Jacob's got to spring to his step. Because he knows he's looking for a girl. He's looking for a date, and he finds Rachel. So,
okay, so he wants to marry Rachel again.
Yes.
There's no dating in this culture.
No.
Even in the Jewish families, they do have some practices for time, duration, even the whole like wedding, right? The feast and the festival that surrounds that. It's a big intentional process. So he goes to his uncle Laban. He says, "Hey, I want to marry Rachel."
Yeah.
And Laban says,
"Work for me for 7 years."
Work for me for 7 years.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like maybe in Laban's back of his mind, because he does, what we do find, though, is that there is another daughter, Leah, who's older than Rachel.
Right, who should be married first.
And so maybe Laban's like, hey, he's going to work for me for 7 years. I got time to get Leah married, married off in that.
Yeah.
That didn't happen.
Yeah.
So Jacob wants to marry Rachel, goes to his wedding, marries someone that he assumes to be Rachel, wakes up the next morning, and it's not Rachel, it's Leah.
Yeah.
He's been duped.
He's been deceived.
He's been deceived.
The deceiver has been deceived.
The deceiver has been deceived. And so he goes to his uncle Laban, and he goes, hey, this isn't what we agreed to.
Yeah.
This does raise other questions, and I think this is an important, we touched on this a little bit last week in the deep dive, but I do think it's important for us as readers. We come to the Bible with our questions. We often approach Scripture and we say, hey, I have a question about this, or I'm reading this and it makes me think this or wonder this. And it's an important principle, I think, in terms of just hermeneutics, in terms of understanding, and reading God's Word well, is, well, what questions should I be asking? What questions is the Bible intending to answer? So questions like, how did Jacob not know that the woman he was marrying wasn't right? Doesn't answer that.
It doesn't. And those are good questions, and we want to, but at some point we have to get beyond that.
Yeah.
And just knowing that the Bible doesn't specifically tell us, and you can probably read through commentaries and Bible scholars, and you probably get 20 different kind of answers or descriptions about that.
And I think as a principle, if we continue to come to the Bible with our own questions, and we get frustrated that it's not answering the questions we want to, that's way less of a problem with the Bible, and way more something that we need to address in our own
and
hearts.
I think it does. It helps us understand, deception. I mean, it helps us understand those kinds of things, because have you ever been deceived and you're like, how did that happen? I don't know how that happened. And maybe that's how we should feel about this. I don't know how that happened. I feel deceived by it. Like Jacob feels deceived by it. And maybe that's what the Bible's trying to do.
And there's a tragedy here in that, like, this shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't have happened. But it also, custom-wise, shouldn't have happened that Rachel is married off before Leah.
Right.
And so, anyway, so Jacob goes to Laban. Mm-hmm. He's like, hey, dude, we had an agreement. You got me. Laban says, hey, it's not customary, right, for us to, for the older daughter not to be married first.
Right.
And Jacob, to his credit, is kind of like, yeah, okay. I see that.
Would have been nice to know ahead of time.
Yeah, it would have been nice to know. And so he then Laban agrees to marry, to allow Jacob to marry Rachel, the woman that he wants to be with, in exchange for another 7 years of labor and of work.
Yeah.
And so, again, it's hard because culturally speaking, this passage isn't primarily about dating, and yet we have dating relationships. We have right. I mean, and this is something that I'm particularly interested in as somebody who's not single. Right, I'm not dating. What is this story? What does it have for me? Right. So Ben, I guess like whenever you think about this passage, when you think about this story, when you think about dating, what points of application can we draw for people who are single and who are dating, but also for those of us who are not single, right, who are in relationships, who are married? What does it have for us?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Part of the series, the challenge has been, how do I take something like dating and what does that mean for everybody? How does it take singleness and what does that mean for everybody? And the Bible just does. The Bible speaks to everybody, even though it's in these, you may not be in this specific situation, but the principles obviously apply. And one of the things in this story is, if you back up to chapter 29, and when Jacob first meets Rachel, there's this interesting interaction because the shepherds are there to water their sheep, and she has a flock of sheep. She's a shepherd, and there's a giant stone that's over this well. The Bible goes into great detail about how big it was. Multiple shepherds had to move the stone, and they kept the stone for the water to be clean so that the sheep could drink. Well, he sees Rachel, and he gets into man mode. He gets into Superman mode. He removes the stone by himself so that she can water and drink her sheep. Yeah. And but what's interesting about Jacob is it's not like it. This isn't his wheelhouse. His brother's a skillful hunter. His brother's an outdoorsman. His brother's the manly man. He's not. He lifts light things. And yet there's a change in Jacob, and up to this point, we talk about selfishness. He does everything. Everything is about himself up to this point. I mean, he steals the blessing. He deceives his brother for the birthright. He tries to grab his brother to be first. It's all about him. And for the first time, he gets an opportunity to do something for somebody else. And I see that as, when I see that as what God's trying to do in us is really to change us, so that for the people that we love. And I think sometimes when we think about relationships, we think about it in terms of this person needs to change for me. If you would change, if you do something different, it would make this relationship a lot better. And what God tends to do in our life is He points it back to us and says, here's some things that you have to change in order for this to work. And that's what happens. That's the start of Jacob's life. And selfishness will continue on his life, but he gives these opportunities for change. It's just an interesting moment in Scripture.
Yeah. The most courageous individuals are the 20-year-old men, 20-year-old boys in the presence of watching women.
That's what happened. That's what happened. It's like, it's shocking. I mean, Jacob's like, I have to think he's got the dad bod. I don't think he's ever lifted anything heavy in his life, but he's like,
he's willing,
and he's like, you know what? I'm moving this thing, and he does it. And he does something for the first time. He feels what it's like to do something for somebody else. So
I'm sure he felt that the next day too. moving a big stone.
Yeah, definitely.
What? Okay. So I guess for married men and women, I do think that, like, oftentimes, there's that, like, date your wife, right?
Yeah.
Like, man, when I was growing up, one of our youth leaders, Paul Young, shout out Paul if you're listening. I don't know if you listen, but if you're listening, I was listening to you. He had this word that he loved to throw out to the young guys, and it was the word woo. WOO. Right?
Yeah.
Like that is our responsibility.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not just picking on the guys. Like I think there's a mutual responsibility, like in relationships, to woo one another.
Yeah.
Because ultimately dating, I mean, that's what it is. It's this series of, hey, can I woo you? Can I, there is something that's not me that I want to pursue because we're wired to do that.
Trying to go for the win.
Yeah, go for the W. Yeah. So I don't know. I do think so Ben, I guess just to get real practical.
Yeah.
How do you pursue your wife?
So, yeah, you know what and what I talk about somewhat in the sermon is that, be romantic. Yeah, try to, think about, what your wife needs. But honestly, the best way that I can woo my wife is to change myself.
That's
and
good.
to change myself for the kind of person that she needs me to be. And so, I mean, I'm embarrassed to say I'm like Jacob. I don't like going out and mowing the grass. I don't like fixing stuff in the house. I don't like doing that stuff. But I know my wife loves that when I do that, because it feels like, okay, I'm a part of this, and we got to get this house fixed, and something's got to happen. Who's going to fix it? And so when I apply myself, so it is thinking about what does my wife need me to be, and that to myself is like, the best way to
That's
to
a good
woo,
question.
to win.
That's a good question. So what I'm hearing you say is dating, like at its best, whether you're single, whether you're married, is about the other person more than it is about you.
Yeah.
And if everyone's striving for that, then you're in a great situation. And
Right.
I think oftentimes where we get wrong, where I see young people get wrong in dating, is it's all about me. It's like, hey, who's the hottest girl that I can, take to the dance because that does something for me and my ego or my reputation. Or it's a who can make me feel the best. And like, that's just like, that was for me, like when I was, cause I didn't date a ton. I didn't date like at all in high school. In college, there's a couple girls I dated. And, like if people were asking me even then, like, hey, are you going to marry so-and-so? I go, no.
Yeah.
And it was way less about that person than it was about me. Cause I'm like, I'm not at a place where I can say, I'm ready to be married, or I'm ready to think about somebody else.
And that's the thing. I mean, think about, you think about kids or, high schoolers, they're still trying to figure out who they are. So how do they know how to enter into a relationship with somebody if they don't know who they are?
Yeah.
And that's part of it, is that you date from your identity, not for your identity.
That's a good line.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it's good to figure out who you are, and it's good to figure out that you're whose you are as well. And that's why we need some time with that. And even when we get into adulthood, even, it's still that figuring out of, whose am I? And I love out of a love that's been given to me, and not in order to receive a love that defines who I am. And I think that can be a huge struggle for a lot of people.
Yeah. And I think it's right. All right, we got just a couple minutes left. We are going to hit into a new segment called Ben's dating advice. So Ben, as a parent,
Yes.
What types of things are you teaching your kids about dating, or how do you talk about dating in the Powers household?
So it's different with my kids, because I have an 18-year-old son and then I have a 14-year-old daughter, and both of them have some experience with dating, and both of them it didn't go well. And so for my son, he's at the age where I encourage him, hey, prom's coming up. Who do you want? You should probably go with somebody. Just start off with a friend. Yeah. Just be friends. And so for him, it's
a fun moment.
It's a fun moment. Yeah. And that age is, he's still trying to figure out who he is. There's a lot of insecurities, and just to encourage him, hey, it's okay to figure that out and to maybe pursue. You're getting to the age where you're going to pursue that So figure out a friendship first before anything. And then my daughter, it's don't date. Don't do it.
Don't do it.
Don't do it. But I know, she's just as well trying to figure it all out. She doesn't. Everybody else is dating around her. So everybody wants to date. She wants to be a part of that. It's at this time it's innocent, and I do teach my kids, hey, you want to date to marry, and it can hurt, and so you want to be smart about it, and so they're both kind of understanding that process. But as generous, I don't. I joke with my daughter, but I don't discourage them to date. But at the same time, I want to give a lot of like context for it. So
context, guardrails. Yeah, it's hard. Like, and I think this is where we come back full circle. God has given us amazing gifts in our relationships with other people. It's why we push small groups so much, right, at our church. It's why, honestly, the mission trips I've been a part of, have been so meaningful, not necessarily because of the work we did, although the work we did was good, but it's the relationships you meet with people in different contexts, the people that you can learn from and hear, who see the world maybe a little bit differently. Yeah. But the team, right, aspect, you're doing something with a team, and those relationships are different. And I think dating relationships, because really at the root, dating relationships are friendships. Yeah. Right? They're not family. Yeah. They're relationships. They're friendships. They're friendships that are different than other friendships. Maybe they're a little more purposeful, or the thing that brought you together is different than other friendships. But God wants to do a work in all of our relationships. To work His plan for redemption. I do think our relationships are one of the greatest sanctifying gifts God has given us. And I think especially when it comes to dating, and again, people date in different stages in life, different circumstances. But I think just on my own story, like the dating relationships that I had were at a time in my life where I was 18 to 24, and there's so much change that happens during those years. Yeah. That that change goes hand in hand. Right. So I love your line that you said, like, hey, don't date for your identity, date from your identity. Because I do think that one of the things we have to get to, or we need to realize, is not just are other people a gift to us, but we are a gift. Right. To the world. Right. Ben, you are a gift to the world. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, you bet. And when we can step into that place and allow ourselves to grow and to allow our capacity for serving other people to expand, look out. Look out. Yeah. That's great. Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for joining. Yeah, man. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Deep Dive. You can find this deep dive and more episodes on our website, CALVARY.CHURCH/resources. You can get more information about this particular series as we go through the life and the story and the relationships of Jacob on our website as well, CALVARY.CHURCH/relationship-series. We got some book recommendations. We've got the outline for the messages as well on there. Put our deep dive, and we put a few other things on there as well. So again, CALVARY.CHURCH/relationship-series. Look forward to catching you again next week. And just remember, if you have a question that you want us to wrestle with on the podcast, just email it to podcasts@calvary.church, and we will make sure to include that in an upcoming episode. Have a great week, and we'll see you again next week.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive, a Calvary Church Media Productions podcast. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts.